Good morning, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and big data as it applies to the investment industry specifically. We're going to look at a couple other areas too, but this is mainly for the investment community. And if you're mathematically inclined or a coder or a data scientist, then this presentation is not for you. This is really, I just want to try to explain to people what this stuff is because it just seems so mysterious and misunderstood. So that was my idea in putting this presentation together, to try to explain it to the people that are not data scientists, I guess lay people, if you will. All right, so that's just the table of contents. You can print this out off my website. All right, so AI, machine learning, and big data are everywhere recently. You can't put on the television without hearing about it. Even the NFL is using it to show play analysis. There is no doubt that AI will have an effect on all industries, similar to the way that the internet or electricity did. But is it really going to change the world? Is it a threat to our civilization? Elon Musk, Stephen Hawking, and Bill Gates are pretty smart guys. Although Elon Musk's behavior recently has been a little on the irrational side, some would argue. But we'll go and take a look at this. All right, so one of the reasons why artificial intelligence is so confusing is because there's really no precise definition of what it is. And added to this is what is known as the AI effect. That means that as soon as AI can solve a problem, it is no longer considered AI. In other words, some people have said AI is whatever hasn't been done yet. For example, back in 1997, when Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov at chess, it was considered a revolutionary accomplishment. Chess had always been considered the pinnacle of human intellect, and it was a big deal when Deep Blue beat the best chess player in the world. But now, guess what? The engine in Deep Blue is conventional, and their chess engines are numerous. You could buy chess software. You can even probably download some for free. That could be the best grandmasters in the world. So it's kind of a moving definition. And you're going to be surprised to find out that AI has been around for a long time. The term was first coined actually back in the 1950s, but we'll get to that in a few minutes. All right, so to understand what artificial intelligence is, we need to understand what intelligence is. So intelligence can be defined as the ability to make a prediction regarding the future based on observations and inferences. Intelligence can also be defined as the ability to set goals and determine ways to achieve them. Now, there are different types and levels of intelligence: animal, human, and artificial. And funny, just as I say animal, that's I don't know if you could hear my neighbor's dog barking. Guess it's pretty intelligent. So anyway, I have a dog, and his name is Clifford, and any pet owner knows that animals have intelligence. So we adopted Clifford about 2.5 years ago, and at first he was kind of standoffish because he's a rescue dog and came from the streets of Bridgeport and so forth. But anyway, after a while, he showed intelligence. Now, when I take him for a ride in my truck, I have this leather leash that I take because I can use it to tie him to the back seat, or to this part of the back seat. When we're going to go into the nature preserve that's across the street for a long walk, I take the extended leash. All right. So when I get ready to take Clifford for a walk, and he can tell because he can tell when I put on my shoes and I put his leash on, he knows. If I grab the leather leash, he runs to the truck. And if I take the extended leash, he runs up to the top of the driveway, waiting to go into the woods. So what is Clifford doing? He's displaying intelligence. He's making a prediction. He can see by the leash I grab, he sees the leash I grab, and then he makes an inference about what's going to happen in the future based on what he saw in the past. So that is intelligence. Now, there's also another way that Clifford can display intelligence. He can also set goals and predict ways to obtain it. Now, if I'm eating something and he wants to have it, He knows that if he begs, barks, and hits me enough with his big paw, that eventually I'm going to break down and give him some of what I'm eating, right? So this is a prediction that his actions will help him attain his goal because these actions have done so in the past. So he set about a goal and he thought about ways to achieve it, and that's intelligence. So then we hit the next level is obviously human intelligence. So we have bigger brains than animals, and so therefore we're more intelligent. We can evaluate more variables and make predictions or think about what we need to do in order to achieve goals. And considering modern civilization has not been around for that long, the fact that we have mapped the genome and figured out black holes and proven black holes and so forth and so on shows that we're pretty intelligent, I guess. Of course, there's oxymorons like military intelligence. We also have figured out ways to kill each other pretty efficiently. Anyway, I like the term synthetic intelligence myself. I think that's just a better term than artificial intelligence because artificial, it makes it sound like an artificial sweetener or something. So now, what is artificial intelligence or synthetic intelligence? Well, it's softwares and computers that can do the things that we just defined as intelligence. These computers and software can analyze the past and use the knowledge to make predictions and inferences about what will happen in the future. They can set goals and take actions that maximize the chances of achieving them, just like Clifford can. All right, so what is machine learning and big data? Well, machine learning is a algorithm that has the ability to evaluate results and to adapt and enhance itself as time passes. All right, so let's say that again. It's an algorithm. It has the ability to evaluate its results and adapt and enhance itself as time passes. And you can see that with some in the trading world. You can see how some firms that use this, their returns have gotten better over time, and that's a sign that their systems are learning. Big data is a set or a term for sets of data that are so large and complex that conventional or traditional methods are incapable of analyzing them. This too is a moving term, like the AI effect, because what was considered big data 10 years ago won't be in 10 years from now. So anyway, where does this data come from? Well, it comes from places like Google, Facebook, cell phones, satellites. I was actually just at a lecture last week where one of the gentlemen there was speaking about satellites and the data that comes from satellites. And yeah, if you own a store and you want to say, well, hey, where should we put it? Well, you can look at the satellite data that says, all right, well, everywhere, and I'm just, hypothesizing now or using hyperbole, everywhere there is a factory and a shoe store and Starbucks is, it's going to look at all over the country and say, well, these three things mean that your store is going to be profitable, so you should put your store next to one of those. They can be used to look at, say, sailing ships or freighters. Some of these satellites can look at a freighter and tell how much oil is in it just by how deep the draw is or how much shadow is coming off of the tanks, which shows the height. So anyway, I personally think the privacy ramifications are going to be staggering as well in the future because essentially, in theory, they could say law enforcement was looking for someone. Well, they could just find him through a satellite and know his every move and have AI predict where he's going to be the next morning. All right, so like I said, the definition of big data is a moving target. What was considered big data 5 years ago is no longer considered big data. And what is considered big data now probably won't be considered big data in 5 years. And if you think about it, it's a moving target in the sense that I think something along the lines of 90% of the data that exists or that has been captured has come in the last few years. And that's a moving target because it's going up geometrically. In other words, back 10 years ago, you could have said the same thing. You could have said, well, in the last 5 years, all big data, 90% of all data that exists has been collected, just like you could say the same thing now. And that's just reflective of how technology is expanding. Then alternative data is data that hasn't traditionally been used for analysis, such as things from phones, social media, satellites, like we just spoke about. But again, this is also a moving target, so to speak. What is considered big data or alternative data now will probably be conventional in 5 years and vice versa. So alternative data is becoming kind of conventional because the satellite example I just used, pretty much every Wall Street sell side analyst that I know of is using this data in their analysis. And it could just be something as simple as looking at how many cars are in the parking lot, right? Like you go look at Walmart, and last year there was 10,000 cars in the parking lot each weekend, and now there's 8,000. Well, what does that mean? Does that mean 20% less people are shopping, or are people moving their sales to online? So these are the types of things that analysts that look at this data consider. So I put this in bold because this is pretty much the essence of what this whole AI craze that's going on is. Artificial intelligence can analyze these data sets and identify patterns. These patterns illustrate relationships between behaviors and outcomes. Once they are known, they can be used to make inferences and predictions about the future, right? So that's pretty simple. And again, let's read this again. Advanced artificial intelligence techniques can analyze these big data sets and alternative data sets and identify patterns. The patterns illustrate relationships between behaviors and outcomes. Once these patterns are known, they can be used to make inferences and predictions about the future. In other words, the last time A, B, and C set up in such a certain way, then D happened. Well, now A, B, and C are setting up in that way again. So the prediction is that D will happen again. And of course, those were just 3 variables. These things can go out to tens of thousands, or not hundreds of thousands of variables. So why are we hearing all about this now? As we will see, these are not new concepts, but it really has to do with computational power. And for instance, in 2006, there was 100 exabytes of data on the internet. Now there's 10,000, and I wrote this like 2 months ago, so I would imagine now there's probably 11 or 12,000. And then there's just an insanely large decrease in costs. A gigabyte of data that cost $300,000 in 1981 is now literally just pennies. And computational power that cost millions of dollars in the early 80s can now also be purchased just for pennies. So that's why this is going on now. It's because there's the availability of these data sets, which, like we said, was a moving target, but now you have these massive data sets, and you have the computational power that can analyze them and look for these patterns. So that's why you're hearing about all this stuff now. So the whole concept of AI and machine learning is not new. All right. So this guy, I guess I don't know even how you say that, Hephaestus. Anyway, he was the Greek god of metalworking, and he was the guy that if you were a Greek god, you went to get your weapons from, right? So he's not a guy you want to mess with. But guess what? He also built self-operating machines out of metal. These included mechanical servants and walking tripods. Point being is that 2,000 years ago, and obviously the ancient Greeks were pretty smart. I mean, they invented philosophy and Plato and Socrates and all those guys. But they were thinking about machines that could think. Now, a lot of people that I talk to, or when I speak about AI, are surprised when they hear this, when I get to this slide, right? So artificial intelligence was first coined in 1956, or the term artificial intelligence was first coined in 1956 at a Dartmouth University academic conference. So, like I said, this is not new, even though it's only been in the news recently a lot. But as a matter of fact, I was watching the X-Files the other day, and there was an episode on which is from 22 or 23 years ago, and it was about how this artificial intelligence gets into the internet. And these 2 scientists, this guy and this woman that are in love, they want to somehow kill themselves to transfer their consciousness into the internet as an artificial intelligence so that they can be there forever. So anyway, take that for what it's worth. The point is that this AI has been around for longer than most people think. So now in the 60s, like I said, the AI came out of the conference in Dartmouth in 56. By the late 60s, it was a very promising field and it was very popular because it was funded by the Department of Defense. All right. And it's actually kind of amazing. And I'm going to put this in the next presentation. You can look at headlines from the late 1960s, and you would think you're reading headlines that are in the paper today. For instance, there's headline by 1974, AI will replace all jobs that humans can do. I mean, that was literally a headline from back then. So, but anyway, things were not as rosy as they seemed, I guess. And by the late 70s, the funding dried up. I think it had something to do with the Vietnam War and all the political turmoil that was going on. So the late 70s are called the AI winter because there was a lack of research and funding. There was some renewed interest in the early 80s with expert networks, but it really just didn't last long. And they called the late 80s the second AI winter. But then by the 90s and the early 2000s, with the internet and the incredible advancements of technology, AI was really able to evolve. And so we'll get a couple samples in society, healthcare, commercial banking, gaming and entertainment, automotive, sports. But it's really used in a lot of industries now, and mostly in terms of research and market research. For instance, any company that has, say, an online marketing campaign or social media marketing, which they all do, like just say you're a retailer, for instance, you're going to be using AI to analyze patterns of, for instance, if someone looks at your website through their phone, are they more likely to purchase a good than if they look at it through their computer, all right? And if such is the case, then they're going to do more advertising towards those phone users and so forth. So the healthcare industry, there's a lot of examples, but like I said, I really wanted to keep this a simple presentation. So think about this. Right now, there are approximately 800 medicines and vaccines that can be used to treat cancer. This actually has a negative effect on doctors because there are just too many options to choose from. That's why I don't like going into diners, because the menus are too big and you could just never choose. I like going into those like upscale Italian restaurants where you just sit down and say to the waiter, like, hey, what am I going to have tonight? And he's like, you're going to have this, that, and the other thing. Right? So it's kind of the same thing. I guess that's a pretty weak analogy, but, well, it's a strong analogy. I guess it's just a tasteless analogy. No pun intended. So Microsoft has a machine called Hanover, which is studying and reading these academic papers. And it's not actually just sitting there reading the paper. It's looking at all the statistics and numbers that are coming out of the paper. But it's trying to figure out which combination of these 800 medicines and vaccines are most beneficial for each patient. And there's another example is there's been proof already that AI does a better job at recognizing cancer when it screens medical scans. So just picture, if you will, like a MRI or an X-ray. The AI can look at that and reference things in the past and make a prediction based upon what it's seeing better than a human being can. All right, commercial baking. Okay, this was one of the first areas that AI was used was in credit scoring. Believe it or not, credit scoring, and this credit scoring was automated about 7 years ago. Now, if you think about this, before that, you say it was 100 years ago and you wanted to get a loan, you would go down to the local bank and talk to the president, and he or she would basically decide, all right, well, yes, you can, or no, you can't. Who knows? Maybe it had to do on merits, if they liked you, relationships. But now you have a sophisticated AI architecture does all this stuff. So it can make better predictions because it just can examine a lot more data and have better predictive powers. So gaming and entertainment, we talk about how Deep Blue beat Garry Kasparov. In 2011, IBM's Watson beat the two human contestants on Jeopardy, one who was the record holder. So this took 5 years. Watson literally spent 4 years learning English, and then another year reading and retaining every word in Wikipedia as well as thousands of other books, and use that knowledge to win on Jeopardy, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. So now, last year, Google's AlphaGo beat, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, KG, who is the Go world champion. And just to understand, Go is phenomenally more, almost inconceivably more difficult or complicated than chess can be. Chess has about 20 possible opening moves. Go has 361 possible opening moves. Chess has an estimated 10 to the 120th configurations. Go has 10 to the 174th. So just for those of us who aren't super mathematical, that is a difference of a million, trillion, 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 trillion. And I assume that's right because I got it off the internet. All right, so everyone's talking about self-driving cars. People are saying, oh, I would never get into a self-driving car. Well, maybe not yet, but eventually self-driving cars are going to be safer than people driving cars. When trains were first invented back in the 1840s, people would not get on trains. There were scientists that said human beings would come apart if they went that fast, right? So your body would just, I guess, fall into pieces. And if you think about it, commercial aircraft are flown by automated programs. I mean, the pilots are just there so the passengers feel comfortable. That's why flying is much safer than driving a car. Yeah, personally, I hate to fly. And I know statistically that odds are greater that I'll get into an accident and get killed on the way to the airport than on the plane, but whatever. I hate flying. Just an FYI there. And of course, they're using it for market research and advertising. So sports are using AI in numerous ways. They're scouting players based on statistics, and that's what the book and movie Moneyball are about. Race cars and NASCARs have sensors that are generating all kinds of data. Such data could be fuel usage, temperature, humidity, tire pressure. So, for instance, when it's this temperature and this humidity, you should have your tires inflated to this amount, and really just kind of almost, you have to have a deep imagination to figure out what this data can be used for, because it can be used for a lot of different things. All right, so now let's look at some different ways that investment managers use them, and these are a little bit overlapping and redundant, but I just want you to get an idea of how you can use these things, especially if you're a portfolio manager or an investment professional. All right, so if you're a traditional long-only manager, you can benefit from tactical asset allocation. In other words, you might have your portfolio at 12% financials and 14% healthcare. Well, a good AI program, or in theory, a good AI program could look at the way things are setting up and say, no, you should have it the opposite. You should have healthcare at 12 and financials at 14, or vice versa. So tactical asset allocation is one of the things where this is being used pretty commonly today so far. And then if you take it to the next level, position weighting. So you might have Apple at 5% and Microsoft at 4% weightings, and it might say, well, you should do the opposite. You should have Microsoft at 5% and Apple at 4%, or what have you. Fundamental research, process. Like, for instance, considering an international microcap manager that has a mandate to hold 50 to 100 positions. So that means there has to be at least 50 positions in the portfolio. And they have an investable universe of 3,000 possible stocks. Well, that's a lot of stocks to analyze, right? To do a good job and analyze 3,000 stocks, that's almost that is an impossible task for your normal human. But you can set up an AI architecture which could screen these out and say, go through your 10 Qs, your 10 Ks, look for things you like. Like, you say you want to buy an equity that has this, that, and the other thing. For instance, price earnings is growing at this amount, volume's that amount, maybe some technical indicators in there. Literally could be thousands and thousands of variables that you could set up, and you can use. So lot of deep value managers I talk to say, well, we don't use AI. We're not a quant fund. Well, eventually you're going to be using AI to find patterns in financial statements such as 10Ks and Qs, macro data, financial statements, accounting data. AI models can analyze and infer from these things. We talked before about retailers using this type of alternative data, such as Google Earth images, parking lot traffic, mentions on Twitter, website visits, etc. Event-driven managers, these are managers that trade based upon just certain things that happen in the market or certain events that happen in the market. So AI could be used to identify predictive patterns. For instance, a political thing happens or a technical thing happens in the market, some kind of technical inflection point, macro related, company specific. So for instance, say a company announces an earnings miss and it is down 20%. An AI architecture could theoretically analyze the stock and all the macro things that are going on and other technicals and how the political landscape affects that particular company and so forth, and say then it could infer, well, it could predict this is the time to buy it, or don't buy it yet, it's going lower. I think this is a really cool place where distressed debt mortgage funds are going to get into it, because basically what distressed managers do is they bid on portfolios of distressed mortgages. And obviously they have formulas or methods to say, well, we think this thing is worth more than we can buy it for, which is why they're buying it. So now some of these distressed managers, they have these models that use between 20 and say 200 variables, but an AI model can be built that could evaluate thousands of variables. And if you do it by, say, zip code, like say you want to say there's an area in, I don't know, Pittsburgh or Detroit or downtown Greenwich, Connecticut, where a lot of people have defaulted on their mortgages and you're bidding on these portfolios. Data can be obtained by zip codes, and it can include things such as stuff you would expect, interest rates, taxes, but then it could look at things that you wouldn't expect. For instance, garbage collection. Garbage is a huge economic indicator, or hugely correlated, or a hugely relevant economic indicator to look at. So I think this is an area where you're going to see this catch. I'm sure it already has in the top funds. All right, so this is something I like to talk about because everyone talks about how AI is this absolute panacea. But guess what? AI does make mistakes and it's not all great. Consider Excel. Now, some people are going to say, well, there was Lotus Notes and all this and blah, blah, blah. But I think this is kind of analogous to when Excel came around in, I guess, the early 80s. So just say Excel came out and there was nothing before it. There were probably successful investment managers that looked at it and said, you know what? I don't trust this thing. How do I know the numbers are right? I'm not going to use it. Then there were probably more forward-thinking managers that looked at it and said, wow, this is great. This could save me time, right? So now everyone uses Excel. But guess what? If you're still an idiot, it doesn't matter if you have Excel or not, because you're still going to be an idiot, okay? So that's kind of the same thing that's going on with AI. Like, for instance, say you want to make an inference about the general population, but you only use data from social media users. Well, then the data is going to be flawed because the entire population does not use social media. For instance, in all the elections, or most of the election AI data I saw predicted Hillary Clinton would win, and clearly she didn't. Another reason why an AI model might not work is because the people who build it don't really understand how it's going to be used. If you talk to data scientists, they'll talk to you about overfitting. And this is when an algorithm just stretches too hard to find correlations in data. In other words, in any data set, there's going to be random noise. And if the model goes too far to try to figure out what is causing that noise, then it's going to overthink it and it's going to overfit it, because by definition, it's not noise if it has something to do with the pattern, right? All right, so there's some ethical and philosophical considerations, and I just like to talk about this stuff because I like ethics. So is it a threat to human dignity? Will it replace nurses, police, teachers? I mean, I don't know. I've met some pretty dumb teachers in my lifetime, and I'd rather have a machine operate on me than a nurse or a doctor, I guess. I mean, I guess that's the thing with the eye surgery, the LASIK surgery, which I've never had because I'm too scared. But that's not done manually by a doctor sitting there with a scalpel, right? That's done by a machine. If it was done by a doctor sitting there with a scalpel, I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have it done because there would be a lot of errors. Now you're going to always have the societal or statistical considerations, which I guess we can talk about in the terms of political correctness. Like, for instance, when someone's getting a medical diagnosis, they always factor in race, age, and gender. But should you consider this stuff if you want to rent someone an apartment or offer someone a job? Well, anyway, this stuff is all going to play out on the statistics because it's going to, I mean, clearly there's going to be differences in data output between different races and ages and genders. So that's going to come up in the statistics. And the question is, should it? So I'm not going to touch that politically correct topic in this discussion, or politically incorrect, I should say. Threat to privacy, I think we've all seen this already. I mean, Google and Facebook. Frankly, I find it pretty amazing that people are surprised that Google and Facebook sells their data. I mean, what do you think they do? Where do you think their money comes from? Could the government have an AI speech recognition technology that could read every email and every text in a population and allow governments to suppress dissent? And my guess is the NSA probably already has that. I think if you got on the phone and called someone and said, hey, let's go blow up the 6 train and use some of the right words, then some AI thing would find you. I mean, it's not like there's a bunch of people sitting there at a switchboard listening to every call that goes on. It's all done by computers and these architectures, these AI architectures. Job displacements. Will AI create more jobs than it will create more jobs than it takes? We all talk about self-driving vehicles. Well, I can tell you, forget that. I know in the security industry, a lot of traders have lost their jobs. For instance, back in 2000, Goldman Sachs had 200 cash equity traders. Now they have 2. So I think this whole thing is going to could have negative repercussions because all this increased productivity suppresses wages. And one of the things that caused the Great Depression was a glut of commodities, right? So then there was deflation, which is a decrease in prices. And no one likes a decrease in prices. It's not good for anyone. But you had too many commodities on the market, so there was a glut of the market, so that drove prices down. So increased productivity was bad. I think you could be seeing the same thing now. Like, for instance, going back to Goldman Sachs, 30 years ago, if you wanted to work for Goldman Sachs, you had to live in New York City or somewhere close. Now you can work for Goldman Sachs out in Utah. That's where all their new compliance people are being hired, and they're getting paid half as much as the people in New York are. So there you go. Technology could be suppressing wages for a lot of areas. Are AI, is it dangerous? Can we ensure that machines behave ethically? I mean, I don't think so, because ethics are in the eye of the beholder, right? Can it be designed or guaranteed to be benevolent? Again, someone in the FBI would have a different definition of what good ethical AI is than someone who works for Al Qaeda, right? So will they have morality? I don't know. I don't think so. But we have to understand there are already positive conversations, medicine or contributions, medicine, transportation, weather forecasting. All right. So I want to end on a little lighter note here. I don't know if you have plans this weekend, but if you're looking for some movies to watch, here's some of my favorite AI movies: Blade Runner, Harrison Ford, Westworld, iRobot, of course, The Terminator. Terminator 1 and Terminator 2 are great. And 2001 and A Space Odyssey. So Blade Runner was 1982, and Harrison Ford has to go kill 4 replicants who are androids that look exactly like humans, and they've escaped. So that's a really cool movie. I might even watch it again this weekend. Westworld was this amusement park where you went to, and I think they had Rome World and Another World and Westworld. Well, anyway, the robots in the Westworld, which are the western area, they malfunction and they start to kill all the visitors. I, Robot with Will Smith. This is pretty cool because it addresses the three laws of robotics that Isaac Asimov talked about. First, a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Second, a robot must obey the orders given it by human beings, except where such orders would conflict with the first law. And third, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second laws. So it's pretty cool. A pretty cool movie. Of course, there's the Terminator, Terminator 2, where Arnold gets sent back in time to kill the Terminator that's after John Connor. Obviously, classic, excellent movie. And Space Odyssey. Now, this one gets special mention because this movie came out in 1968, and it's probably the most advanced of any one of these movies. It really shows what a genius Stanley Kubrick was. They even had HAL the computer defeating people at chess, which was deemed impossible at the time. So anyway, this is an old movie. Gosh, it's 50 years old, but it's an absolute classic, and it just shows what a visionary he was. All right, so in conclusion, as we have seen, AI, machine learning, and big data are not as mysterious as they seem yet. Or they're not yet a threat to humanity. In terms of the investment world, investment managers have to embrace this stuff, and it'll help them outperform. And those who are in denial and refuse to adapt to it will be left behind. All right, so that's it. Hopefully, this helps you understand these topics a little bit and take some of the mystery out of it. If you have any questions, you know where to reach me. Thank you.